This is Quillbilly Garage. You are watching another episode in the series 1934 Ford Sedan Resurrection. This is a car that has been in my family since 1966, but hasn't been on the road since about 1975. Where we left off last, we had just gotten the front wheels back on, the drums, greased the front bearings, and adjusted the brakes. Today, we're going to move to the back and see what it takes to get that put back together. It's cold out today, and it's a balmy 26 degrees here in the shop. I do have a heater going some of the time that takes a bit of the bite off. So let's get started. Here is one of the rear drums off. As you can see, if you watched the previous episode, this is a different kind of wheel bearing. It is not a tapered wheel bearing. It's a straight wheel bearing. There's a retainer clip here holding it in, and there's a grease seal, and then we'll get the bearing out and look at that a little bit closer. And if we go to look at the car, this is what it looks like with the drum off. This area here is the race that roller bearing rides on, and this is part of the rear end housing. Then you're looking at the axle shaft coming out that has a keyway on it. As I understand the instructions on putting these back together, this surface needs to be clean, not oily. Same with the surface inside the hub that mates up to that. And there is a torquing procedure to get this on correctly. I will talk about that more when we get to it. So the first thing I'm trying to do here is get the grease seal out. I was able to get the retaining ring out, no problem, using a couple screwdrivers to pry it up out of the groove. But this seal it's friction fit in there. I got it to move up a little bit. I've already gotten it up past the groove for the retainer clip, but I thought I'd pause and tell you what I've gone through. I went in and did a little research online, and of course back in the day there was a service tool designed for pulling these seals out. But I did get a few ideas. The way I got it up this far is I stuck a pry bar in here and then hit the handle with a dead blow hammer, and it would pop it up. Well, I'm getting to the point now that when I hit it, I'm hitting the pry bar and it's pushing the other side of the seal back in. So I'll dig through my tools and see if I can come up with something that will help me get it out. You'll notice the roller bearing in there, it just floats. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but if I stick my finger on it, it has movement up and down, or I should say in and out if this were installed on the car. So that's just the way it's designed. It's not supposed to be pressed fit in there. It drops right in. My comment about the temperature out here, in case you're watching from another country where you might be used to Celsius, not Fahrenheit. This is 26 degrees Fahrenheit here, so well below freezing, but we're having a good time. All right, I was able to get it out by prying it up a little bit, as you saw a few seconds ago. Then I pulled out my slide hammer that's my kind of a universal puller kit, and it had this little attachment for it that I was able to fit under the seal and slide up on the slide hammer and go around and around, and it popped out. It's no problem. Now the bearing should slide right out of here, because again, it's not a pressed fit. So there it is, comes right out. We'll get this cleaned up, and then we'll talk about what kind of grease should be used on these type of bearings. The grease that you see on here, I believe, is the wrong type. So we'll get to that in a little bit. I've got this bearing all cleaned up now, and pretty cool. You can see it's got the Ford logo stamped into it. Unlike even the front bearings on this car and more modern bearings, tapered wheel bearings, these have a lot looser tolerances. Unfortunately, see these these rollers right here, they have a lot more slop than the others. And what happened here, if you can see in the video, the cage is bent up a little there, and so it's not fully capturing the ends of those rollers. It's possible that I did that accidentally when I was popping the seal out. I may have accidentally caught the lip of that and bent it up. But what I'm going to do, and some of you might cringe at this, but I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to take a brass mallet, set this on an anvil, and get a brass mallet and try to tap that down a little to see if I can recapture these. So we'll give it a shot, see if it works. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the wheel bearing grease. That was one of the subjects that, that paused progress for a while. What I learned is that these style bearings that, again, don't have the same clearances as a tapered wheel bearing, a cone style bearing, they require what used to be real common, and now I had a hard time finding it. Basically, they require this sodium-based fibrous grease, and it's those fibers, as I understand it, it's those fibers that help pull the grease through the bearings, and rather than just running out. I'm sure I explained it very poorly there, but it's the best I could do. Anyway, I couldn't find any of this grease at the part stores. I had an old, almost empty tub of it with a part number, but that was an obsolete part number from the major brands that I was used to buying. So I went online. It turned out not being hard to find after all. I just went online and searched sodium-based, I think fibrous grease or long fiber wheel bearing grease, and it was readily available. And that's what I've got here to grease these with. We'll get back to that later. Earlier I mentioned that I thought these bearings had the wrong grease in them, and that's what I was talking about. It didn't look like it was that fibrous grease, but then it occurred to me that, well, that grease was really old, and who knows if it was the right stuff or not. Anyway, another point of interest, the taper in the hub and the taper on the axle, it's the mating of those two surfaces that hold the hub to the drum. It's not the keyway doing the job. So I was instructed by a friend that I need to get that as clean, no grease on it at all, same with the inside of the hub, and before I mate those together. And then there's a torquing procedure. Ultimately they need to be torqued to like close to 200 foot-pounds of torque, but the advice I was given was to tighten them, say maybe over 80, and then drive the car around a little bit, and then torque them some more, and then drive around a little bit and torque them some more. And not till the very end do I actually go ahead and put the cotter key through the castle nut. So that's what I'm going to do. Well, that actually worked beautifully. I don't actually have an anvil. I have this broken off piece of a crankshaft and then this brass mallet. But I don't know if you'll be able to tell in the video, but I got that looking pretty good. I feel comfortable with that, putting it back together. I've got the insides of the hubs all cleaned up. And I have the bearings greased. Now, ordinarily, I would be a little more generous with the grease because who cares where it goes once it's inside the hub. But I was specifically taught that the part of the hub there with the keyway, that's the tapered part that mates up to the tapered end of the axle. I was given clear instructions that there should be no lubricant of any sort on there, or it will interfere with the proper mounting of things. So I didn't put a lot of extra grease on this because I didn't want it to make its way into the tapered portion of the hub. So I was just about ready to drop this bearing in place, put the new seal in, but check this out. It's the wrong diameter. Here's the original seal. Would fit right in. Inside diameter is the same, but the outside's different. So I dug through my parts because I had a couple sets of seals from two different suppliers, and both of them, or both sets, are the same. They're the outside diameter, the OD, is too large for the hub. So here I was all ready to put it back together and ran into that problem. Unfortunately, the seals that came out, I couldn't find a part number or make on them anywhere. So I'll have to do a little research online. Maybe there's a difference between, say, early and late drums on the OD of the seal. So back to the drawing board for a little bit. I'll put things away and get that bearing in a plastic bag so it doesn't get contaminated, and we'll get back to this when I learn more and have the right parts. Alright, so a couple of weeks have gone by. I ordered the right size seals and I have them here ready to go. In the meantime, I did do some other work on the car and grab some footage for some future videos. So here we are back at it. I've got the hub all cleaned out, free of grease. Free of grease on the tapered part that contacts the axle. And I've got a little kit that I bought here that's got new key stock. These are tapered to line up with the tapered part of the keyway. New castle nuts, new washers, and then these little fiber gaskets that go in there. I was and the cotter keys. I was perplexed that it came with two sets of steel washers. I don't remember taking 4 off. So I looked up the part number for the kit, and it looks like they just sent me an extra set. So that solves that. Like I've said many times, I'm just one guy, no tripod. I can't do everything on camera, so I will turn the video off and put the bearings in the hub, tap the seal in. Of course, I've got the perfect seal driver, and I can't find it, so I'm going to use this old 3/4 drive socket, probably, to carefully tap the seal in place. Again, here's the seal that is the right size. So I will get to it here. I ended up having to go through my 3/4 drive sockets and get one a little bit smaller because the seal has to be recessed into the hub. And then, remember, this little snap ring goes in there to hold it in place or keep it from coming out. So this, what is this? Is a 2 3/16 socket was the right diameter to get it pushed in there far enough. So now it's installed. I was very careful when centering it on the axle shaft to not get grease on the tapered portion. I started using, well, you can see, I don't know if you can see in there, but behind the washer there is a blue, yeah, there you can see a little blue dense fiber gasket that goes in there, and came in the kit. I decided not to use the castle nut and washer that came in the kit. The old ones were, well, they're nicer. They're original. This the washer, I had trouble. I almost had to thread it on the axle shaft to get it on, and so I took it back off. And then the nut, the older ones are just, let's see here. The original ones are just cooler. It's deeper. Let's see here. Focus. Here's the replacement that I bought. It would have worked just fine, but I think the originals are cooler, and I've got them, and so why wouldn't I use them? And it actually threaded back on easier. So again, there's a torque process to these. Can't get it really tight right now because the drum just spins. So I'm gonna get it as tight as I can and then wait until I have the wheel on. Then I'll set it down, set the car down and torque it. Well, I've got the car down on 3 wheels now. I remember I needed to put a wire wheel spacer behind the wheel, and so when I was looking for that and then looking for a wire brush to clean off the mating surfaces, wouldn't you know it, I found my seal driver kit right where it belongs in the toolbox drawer that I did not look in. So I'll use that for the other side. But anyway, I got the wheel on and tightened down, and then I went ahead and torqued the axle nut to somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds. I think you might be able to see that I put a little scratch mark right there on the hub. That's so I know where the hole is in the axle shaft for the cotter key. So again, the instructions I were given were to tighten it up to about that tight, drive it around a little bit, torque it some more, drive around a little bit, torque it some more, and get it up to around 200. Ultimately get it up to around 200 foot-pounds of torque, and tighten to the next hole that lines to the next notch in the castle nut that lines up with the hole for the cotter key, and to not back it off. Tighten to the next hole, not back it off to the closest one. So anyway, we'll get it back up in the air here and do the other side. Working on the passenger side now, I got the seal installed, this time using the proper tool. However, I did find it useful to use the socket at the very end to get it down the rest of the way. I don't know if there's really a stop in there for the seal, so you're carefully trying to tap it in far enough to get past the groove that the snap ring goes in. And so I found this time I didn't quite get it down far enough, and I had already started getting the snap ring in place and noticed that here on the far side it was still not seated. So I don't know if this is an approved method, but I ended up setting the socket on there and whacking it a few times, and it seemed to go into place. So this time I was a little smarter about lining up the hub on the axle shaft. I rotated the axle around to where the keyway was straight up and down, put the keyway in place, and then I stood here and sighted through the hub hole while slipping the drum on. And so that was, I don't know why I didn't do that the first time. That was a more effective way, or for sure way, of getting the hub on without getting any grease on the tapered shaft. So then I took my little pick tool here and made sure that I had it cleaned out for the little fiber gasket. I'm going to go ahead and make a scratch mark there for locating the cotter key hole and get it back together. I've got the wrenches hanging out here just for show for a minute. I mentioned in my other video when I was doing the front brakes that it helps having an extension. This is an old extension. As you can see, it's a smaller diameter and then flares out at the end. Having that smaller diameter is helpful because it's hard to get really a straight shot on the lug nuts unless you're using some kind of a wobbly socket. But you can just about get it straight if you use this thin smaller diameter shaft extension on the socket. Something else I mentioned in a previous video, back when we first got married and we were living in a college town, I had acquired a few vehicles. Then we moved and needed to get rid of a couple of them quickly. One of them was a 73 Dodge long bed stepside, Forest Service green. And I think it probably was a Forest Service truck. It had a radio delete, and it was spec'd out with 16-inch wheels, which I thought was unusual for a half-ton in the 70s. Anyway, I traded that truck for some tools. That was the quickest way I could get rid of it. This ratchet, this half-inch drive ratchet's one of them. I mentioned that in my previous video, but also this torque wrench that I'm using is one of the tools I got in trade for that truck. Now we're going to get this down on the ground and get everything tightened up. So I got it back up in the air to adjust the brakes. I talked about this a little more on my video where I did the front brakes. There are 4 adjustment points. 2 on top, that's for the forward shoe. The bottom adjustment for the forward shoe. The top adjustment for the rear shoe, and the bottom adjustment for the rear shoe. And like I say, I talk about it more in my other video, but I haven't changed the shoes, so I'm going to assume that they were adjusted properly years ago when they were put on. Probably not necessarily a safe assumption, but that's what I'm going to go with. It's a little trickier, at least it seems like it, to get the lower ones adjusted right. And from what I understand, if they were adjusted right to begin with, if all you're doing is making adjustments for the wear on the shoes, you can just go with adjusting the top. If anybody has any information they'd like to share on that or any tips on this, I'd love to hear them. In the meantime, I'm just doing what I can. It takes an 11/16 wrench to adjust those out, and I learned on the internet to do the forward shoe first, so that's what I did. And then the rear shoe. On the back brakes, you can see that is pretty tight to get on the rear adjuster. So I had to use an open end wrench, and even still, I couldn't get a lot of movement. I got it adjusted and then I couldn't get the wrench off, so I had to unadjust it just to get the wrench off. So I went back in my toolbox. Probably not the right use of this, but I have some thin wrenches. So I used a thin 11/16 open end to finish up adjusting the rear shoe. I know they make a special wrench for this. Some of the early Ford part suppliers carry, and I'll probably end up getting one of those and throw it in my glove box. So that, this is the first time this car's had 4 wheels and tires on it since we started this whole brake project. Brakes and wheel bearings and things like that. And all I have left to do for this video is adjust the parking brake. And so, let's see if I can see it here. I need to get the car up higher, but I think all we need to do is I'll pull some tension on the handle and then adjust this, and probably do a little back and forth up top and down below. Nice having the car on the lift, so I can just raise it up and put it back down. Okay, we're in the car here and pulling on the parking brake. It's got 3 clicks, 3 detents. So I'm going to release it, pull it just to the first one. I'm making this up as I go, by the way. I haven't read any instructions, but I'm going to put it on the first one, get under the car, and tighten up the cable linkage until I can sense some drag on the car, on the wheels, and then see how the handle feels. See if releasing it makes the wheels spin freely, and if pulling on it makes them stop. I did some tightening on the linkage under the car off camera. Now I'm back up top. I released the handbrake, and then I pulled it all the way and released it and pulled it all the way a couple of times. And now I have it pulled all the way back on the 3rd notch. Let's go see if the wheels turn. Conveniently, this fender's off, so easy to get to the wheel. And nope, it will not turn. I tried it with 2 hands off camera, so trust me, it won't turn. So now we will release it and see if they will turn. Haven't tried that yet. All the way forward. And it turns. There's a little bit of drag, but that's intentional when I adjusted the brakes. Try the other side here. And that one turns freely as well, with just a little bit of drag. I'll get this back up in the air and show you what I did. And I do need to do the lock nut on the linkage so it doesn't move. So all I had to do under here was back this nut way off and then tighten that one. And now that we've got it adjusted to where we want it, I'll just hold that and tighten that down with the lock washer, and that'll hold it in place. Well, I've got it back on the ground. First time that it has had all 4 tires on the ground since we started this whole brake project. I decided to leave the parking brake under tension, thinking that maybe being new components, maybe the cable has a little bit of stretch out that happens. So I thought I'd leave it under tension and then check back on it in a day or two and see if the brake still holds. So thanks again for watching my channel, Quillbilly Garage, and stay tuned for more episodes about this car and others. Till next time.